Thank you all so much for being here today. It's the first session of Quakerism 101 in 2022. Yeah, so today, usually the first session will introduce sort of the early history of the Friends. So sort of the very beginning of the Quaker movement. And I might actually, I'll start that story even just a little bit earlier with sort of what was happening previously in the Reformation. And then also, as I was just explaining, we are sort of structuring the course this year, oh hey Hannah, around the book, The Quaker Way, A Rediscovery by Rex Ambler. I'll hold it a little closer, you can see it there. Yeah, so it's not required or anything, and but I do find it a very good introduction. At least it resonated very strongly with me in terms of what this is all about. So I will sort of be talking a little bit about the first chapter on truth today. But before we get started, I just would like to just try to get to know everyone a little bit and just to introduce ourselves and maybe just sort of a couple questions, just what your religious background is, and then what got you interested in Quakerism. I might as well, I'll go ahead and start. My name is James Fuller. I was actually raised in a very a-religious, if not actively anti-religious family. My mother was very staunchly atheist, deeply rejected Christian tradition. However, I grew up in Orange County, California, which had a lot of big churches, very active religious life, also very diverse community, so many religious traditions represented there. And I was just very curious about all of this and somewhat terrified as well. My friends would sometimes at school talk about hell, and it was a very disturbing concept to me. I always sort of was a little bit worried about it. And started to read. And in high school, I read C.S. Lewis and became very devoutly Christian, to the horror of my family. And I guess I sort of continued in that. It wasn't devout in a very active participatory way. I was mostly just staying by myself and being worried about this. Though then after a while, I started reading a little bit more history and historical criticism and sort of broke away from that. It was about 10 years ago that I found the Quakers here in Austin. I was just telling you, I was reading a novel by Jeffrey Eugenides called The Marriage Plot, and they had a description of a Quaker meeting one of the characters went to, and it really resonated with me. It sounded like something that was really a way to worship that felt authentic, and that something that I could really connect to spirit with. And so I started coming to Friends Meeting of Austin, and unlike before when I was just sort of worrying about these things on my own, it was good to be in a community of people who were also sort of talking and thinking about these things. So yeah, that's sort of, sorry for the longish story of how I came here. But maybe if, let's see, what would be the best way to go around? It's always a little hard to go around Zoom since I know everyone shows up differently on each other's screens. I don't know if anyone feels inspired to go next. Feel free to either unmute yourself, or if you're here, just say hello.
Hi, I'm Keith. I was raised Southern Baptist, very much grew up in that sort of evangelical world. And just even from when I was really young and a child, I always felt like there was this big disconnect between what I felt in worship and in prayer versus what I was being taught. Just there was always this sort of tension between those two things. And as I grew up, I sort of had the stereotypical gay evangelical coming out experience and didn't want anything to do with religion for a very long time. But stumbled on Quakerism. There's the Belief Net quiz that apparently a lot of people discovered Quakerism through. It's like a find your religion thing. So learned about Quakerism that way. It just always kind of felt right. Um, Visited a few times here and in other cities. And just in the last few months, I've been wanting to take things a little bit more seriously and make it more of a priority. So yeah, I'm really excited to learn more.
Great.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I've grown up in a benign uh, Protestant church with a healthy, forward-thinking, inclusive social agenda. Do good work, don't be judgmental, serve. None of the ritual ever spoke to me or appealed to me. And slowly, Quakerism has sort of seeped into my consciousness, and I've been regularly attending meetings for about 6 months, and heard about this and looked forward to it. I've been reading Rex Ambler's book, and I'm very eager to sort of see what transpires in the coming weeks with this conversation. That's it.
We're just sort of introducing ourselves at the moment. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? So my name is Prakash Villanillam. My wife Lulu and my son Zach are here also with me. It's just the way the computer is oriented. You can't really see them. So I grew up in Southampton, Pennsylvania, which is outside of Philadelphia. And I grew up in a very, very strict Christian Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox Christian household. Because my grandfather was like, he practiced that. So my father practiced that. For some reason, in 1983 or 82, I think it was, a very long time ago when I was a kid, my father took us to a friends meeting in Southampton, Pennsylvania, in Bucks County. Like I said, it's outside of Philly. And it was very different, very different. Just like, you know, the meditation and seeing the light in every person and everything. And as a kid, I didn't understand everything, but I knew that they accepted people. And as one of the very few Indian families at that time in the 70s, we were not very accepted at all by working class whites, especially. But the Quakers really embraced, they wanted to find out more about us, and they seemed very genuine. So anyway, so that stuck with me as a kid. And then as I became an adult, drifted away from religion altogether because I didn't like the sort of institutional dogmas, and I saw a lot of hypocrisy and so forth and so on. I drifted away, and then, you know, I started my own family. I got married in 2001, and my wife, I don't know if can I speak for you, Lulu, or she grew up in a very similar religious background as me before we found Quakerism. So she's also from the Eastern Orthodox Church and everything like that, and highly, highly patriarchal. Whatever the father or whatever the eldest son says, that's what goes. And I didn't really understand that until, you know, until Lulu told me about the oppression and all the, you know, I thought I had it bad, but then when I listened to her, I really understood, you know, her viewpoint. So anyway, we raised our son Zach in a very How did I raise you? Did I raise you with religion, Zach? Okay, so I didn't raise Zach at all with religion. I wanted him to learn about other religions, Buddhism in particular. But I don't think I ever took Zach to a church. I got a lot of flack for that because my parents wanted me to baptize him. My grandparents wanted. I mean, it was a lot, and the circumcision and all this kind of stuff. I said no. I didn't see the point in any of it. Neither did Lulu. But then Zach developed his own kind of like you, James. You know, he developed his own sort of interest in different religions, and also he started a club in his high school called the Humanist Society, and he started reading different things. And I started pointing him in different things. And then we discovered something very interesting last year, which is the things that he was talking about in his Humanist Society aligned very well with what I remember the Quakers doing when I was a kid. So I said, wait a minute, maybe I should introduce him and Lulu too to the Friends. And I didn't even know that there was a Friends Society here in Austin until, you know, I Googled it and all that. So anyway, that's a long story, but that's kind of the background. Sorry that it took too long.
No, oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Cool.
I'll jump in so people don't have to feel like we have to go through the remote folks first. I'm Coy Jones. Today is really the first day. I came to a Quaker meeting for the first time in like 20 years, but no real connection to Quakerism. But I thought I'd stick around, see what's going on. But just my background, like Heath, I think I grew up Southern Baptist. Pretty very religious family. My brother and my sister-in-law are both ordained ministers in the more moderate branch of Baptists. There's been several splits since I was born, but there's one called CBF, or Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and my parents have a very strong Baptist faith. I grew up with that. I didn't find quite honestly, I didn't find any dissonance or disconnect. I grew up. I was a good conservative for most of my youth, and was a youth director in college. But my family does have a very strange and intellectualist strand of, like, you know, Baptists come out of the same sort of background as Quakers. Like, Quakers may be a little bit more radical, but, you know, Baptists piss off a lot of people too, for good reasons. They, you know, in theory, they are very you know, anti-authoritarian. I definitely had that streak theologically growing up, and you know, I was enough into that where, you know, by the end of college, I, you know, saw what Southern Baptists had become, and it was just very clearly clear hypocrisy, as I think everybody learns anew in each generation about the hypocrisy of the church, whatever church they're in. So I was really I felt the need for a conversion to something. Quakers were at the top of my list, but also Catholicism. I was really like looking at two very different paths, because they're at least at the time, given increasing my radicalism as a Baptist, going back to roots, while it made the Quakers attractive, some of the things I thought were attractive about Quakerism was also part of the problem. Like I was, if you know the history of Roger Williams, like Roger Williams got to a point, he's a great Baptist figure, founder of Rhode Island, all that stuff, right? But like, he got to a point where he couldn't worship with anyone except himself and his wife, and he wasn't too sure about her. That was that kind of just kind of a zealotry and just an uncompromising view of your own righteousness. I was very much in that Roger Williams tradition, and I was like, I don't know, Quakerism might take me deeper down that rabbit hole. So I chose Catholicism, and I was a good Catholic for about 10 years. But but then, you know, it's really a bad fit with somebody who does not have authoritarian tendencies. So my experience is very similar to those who, you know, on the call who talked about the patriarchal situations that I grew up in, et cetera. When my son was born around 2009, I just found that I didn't want him to be in any of this. I just kind of quit. I quit everything. I didn't stop going to church, and I was kind of professionally religious too. I have a master's degree in theology. I did PhD work in philosophy of religion. Like I was really into it. And then I was just like, nah, no more. I don't want to talk too long, but like I'll very quickly where I'm coming from. I like the idea of silence for an hour. I'm sick of chatter. It's not even that I disagree with it. I'm just sick of how everything, especially our deepest spiritual life, has just become chatter. And I want to participate in it again, but I don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to talk anybody talking to me, which is weird that I'm here talking about it. But like I want a place where there's something chatter free. I'm happy to chatter after, but can I have something that's just quiet? Yeah, that's right. There you go.
Hi, I'm Mitch Derry. I grew up in a somewhat conservative Methodist church. My family didn't go to church all that often, though. So I guess my really first spiritual path really started, I think, with when I went to a Methodist college ministry while I was in college. And after that, it's kind of been back and forth for a while, where I kind of lost faith and got it back again. And I'd always been interested in Quakerism. And I over the years read about it, and I not sure why it took me so long to actually go to a meeting, but I went to a meeting about 4.5 years ago. I'd been to meetings a couple of times before, just once or twice, but started going regularly about 4.5 years ago.
Hello, my name's Claire Klossman. I was brought up traditional Catholic, and I was rebelling against that about as early as I can remember, getting in arguments with my mother about it in 6th grade. But they still made me go to church and catechism class all through high school. So immediately upon moving out and going to college, I dropped all religion. And then it wasn't until I finished graduate school and was in my 30s that I started exploring other spiritual traditions. And I looked around, I sat in on various other types of church services. I explored Buddhism pretty extensively. I sat in on some Unitarian churches. One I became almost active in, but none of these were really a good fit. And then I became active in abolition, in particular on the case of Rodney Reed, and I got to know the Quakers quite well during that time. And it was then that I realized this tradition might be a good fit for me. I love the silence and the meditation that really, really fit well with the Buddhism I had explored before, and the ongoing meditation I aspire to practice. So it's just been, since I've been sitting with the Austin Quakers, it's been wonderful, just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I loved the readings for today. It really brought me a new understanding and a new appreciation for Quakerism.
My name is Lily, and I, unlike some other people that actually grew up in a really progressive Christian Methodist tradition, and especially had a lot of exposure to contemplative prayer and that practice. So that's kind of what interested me in the silence.
I'm so sorry, Lily. It's a little hard to hear you. Is there,
Sorry, I think I'm having mic issues.
oh, that's way better. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up in a progressive Methodist church with a lot of background in contemplative prayer, which is kind of what attracted me to Quakerism and the type of service. I also, when I was getting married a couple of years ago, was looking into different types of marriage ceremonies and was reading about kind of the Quaker tradition there, which kind of piqued my interest.
My name's Jim. I'm sorry I came in a little late. I've been moved to Austin in 2016 and started coming to Friends Meeting of Austin at that point, joined in 2018. I've considered that a little bit of a homecoming for me. I moved very far away from my family. I've got a lot of family on the East Coast. I was raised as a Quaker by ex-Catholics, very activist household. There's some social justice Catholicism in my family's past as well. I have always considered myself a non-theist. I also have a couple philosophy degrees. Practiced Zen Buddhism for a long time. Married a Jewish woman, and we raised our son in a Reformed synagogue in Maryland. And I started going to those services and to his confirmation, bar mitzvah classes, and really enjoyed what I learned and participated in terms of the worship, in particular because of there was much, well, obviously no emphasis at all on the figure of Christ. And that kind of opened me up to a more theistic kind of way of thinking, where I'd always been a non-theist, and I still consider myself a non-theist. And one of the things that attracted me and made me want to join the Friends Meeting of Austin is that I also am a little bit allergic to chatter, and but what I discovered about myself was that when I heard Christian-oriented or God-oriented talk ministry from people at Friends Meeting of Austin, I found myself open to it. And it took me a little while to figure out that this was like not irritating me. and so it felt like this was an important kind of message that I need to kind of deepen my own spiritual practice. And like everyone here who's spoken about it, the silence is really important to me. But the speech is incredible as well, and it's an incredibly democratic practice. We want to hear from each other, and we care about what each other has to say, and we benefit from each other's messages. That's really moving to me, and gives me a sense of a community that is non-hierarchical.
I like your background a lot, Jim, your trees.
Thanks. That's Bull Creek Park.
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Hannah. I come from a Presbyterian background that was pretty strict and extreme in some ways, but I also think I had a lot of opportunity to like read the Bible and think critically sometimes. There's just a lot of like close Bible reading, which I appreciated. But then when I was a teenager, I started reading other stuff just on my own, like about morals, and I think I would have left the Presbyterian church anyways, like it was coming. Because I had some bad experiences with the authority and the hierarchy. But I just remember like reading Nietzsche and stuff made me feel really good about it, about leaving. And so then I didn't go to church for like 4 or 6 years for a while, and I kept praying, and I kept I started like sitting kind of and meditating and breathing, not with a group or anything, just on my own, and then kept like praying as I had learned to do. And then it was a few years ago that I was reading about religions on, I think it was Wikipedia. And I was just, yeah, I was drawn to the description of worship, I think from a Wikipedia page. And I came to the Friends meeting in Boston.
Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for sharing. I love hearing all everyone's background, and especially given everyone's background, I really will appreciate your help in this. I am not by any means a great expert on Quaker history and theology. There's just so much to know and such depth there. And if there are things that I miss or get wrong, please do feel free to correct anything or add wherever you think it would be helpful. I guess, yeah, so today, I guess just my plan was to just start with a little bit of history, trying to set the stage of what was happening in the mid 1600s when the Quaker movement was first starting, and what sort of questions and problems they were thinking about. And then sort of move from there into thinking about what it is that we are trying to open ourselves to in meeting for worship. What was it that those early friends were finding in silence that really was that initial sort of beginning of the Quaker movement, that initial idea, that initial experience? So yeah, I guess I have a little timeline that I've been passing out to people here. I should probably screen share it so as not to, I'll need to retrieve it from my email real quick. So give me 1 second while I do that on the screen. Please don't judge my inbox. You might see it for a second. People here. Okay. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm not very good with Macs. So I might just read you guys a little bit of this. Hopefully you'll, I'll email it to you all later as well. Hopefully that's okay. So anyway, I guess I was going to start the story. The Quaker movement begins in the 1640s. However, it's part of a series of waves of Protestant movements that began on the continent in Europe over 100 years before that. So I guess this all famously sort of begins Martin Luther posting the 95 Theses in 1517. And then that movement quickly began to actually reflect things that would happen later in England with the Quaker movement, in that it starts off with this rejection of the dominance of the Roman Church, as well as a lot of the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church, a move to centralize the Bible and reading the Bible as the source of authority in religion. And this, though, because there's sort of this disruption of the church hierarchy, there start to be much more radical religious movements that quickly begin to spring up. There's a big peasant rebellion in Germany that then Lutherans have to fight against. And most directly connected to the Quakers eventually will be the Anabaptists, who are a very anti-hierarchical religious movement. There's a deep belief in inward religious experience, leading to sort of being the ultimate authority in terms of religion for them. And there's an uprising. The Anabaptists take over the city of Munster. They are eventually defeated. It's actually quite a terrible situation. This is before the Anabaptists sort of started moving in more peaceful directions. And the Lutherans and Catholics, actually, this is one of the few instances where they would work together. They came together to fight the Anabaptists in Munster. But what eventually happened with the sort of part of the Anabaptist movement that survived was its more sort of pacifistic wing with Mino Simmons, the sort of founder, considered the Mennonites. There's a Mennonite church here in Austin, and they're, along with the Quakers, sort of one of the peace churches that we work together often in pacifist. But the reason I'm telling you all this story that's sort of slightly removed from the Quaker experience, which is very much grounded in English history, is that you are seeing something similar, I think, in sort of the German-speaking parts of Europe, that they had this sort of dynamic where these sort of old authorities and hierarchies are thrown off, and then people begin to look to their own experience and their own interpretations to try to find religious truth. And that sort of exploration leads to periods of great sort of violence and tumult, but then ultimately in Germany and then from Netherlands as in England to the foundation of a sort of one branch of that radical Protestant tradition that is committed to peace and to equality. And that they're kind of I feel like our spiritual brethren, the Mennonites. Then moving forward, in England, the Church of England splits with Rome in the 1534. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of Henry VIII and his desire to marry again and his eventual split. And a little while later, you have sort of the continent, Calvin in 1541, sort of one of the other major strains of Protestantism. And those ideas sort of from Calvin begin to have serious impact in the British Isles. There's the Puritan movement, which is a little bit before the Quaker movement starts. The Mayflower, of course, sails to America in the 1620s, which is before all of the Quaker story begins. So that was a very whirlwind introductory history of Protestantism. Are there any sort of questions or additions before I dive into sort of the more Quaker proper part of this? Cool. All right. I guess I'll keep going. George Fox is born in 1624. So he's sort of in his early 20s for most of the English Civil War, which begins in 1642. It's this period where sort of mounting conflicts between the king and parliament sort of just come to a head, and they actually start fighting each other. And parliament is mostly dominated by people of a more sort of Calvinist Puritan strain of Protestantism, which tends to be more sort of egalitarian, also more inclusive of people in sort of the mercantile class, whereas the royalists, the chevaliers, they tend to be much more committed to sort of a high church, more Catholic sort of version of worship and version of the Church of England. Some of them are also Catholics as well. And so this fighting rages for a while. Charles I is executed in 1649, in the beginning of the Commonwealth period in England, in which there isn't monarchy. Things are ruled by all Cromwell and Parliament. And it's this period of just tremendous, tremendous religious tumult in England. There are tons of religious movements that begin at that time. They have all sorts of names that are kind of funny. They're the, let's see, gosh, they're the Levelers, the Diggers, the Grindletonians, the, I think the Fifth Monarchy Men, the Ranters, and then of course, the Quakers as well. And all of these movements had, I'd say, pretty strong egalitarian impulses, but they were sort of pursuing them in slightly different ways. They came from this great expansion in publishing. People were starting to read more religious tracts and start to have their own ideas and their own discussions. And there was just this great religious seeking. I also get the sense, this is from largely from a history book called The World Turned Upside Down. It's a really sort of excellent history of the English Civil War period and religious thought then. But this disruption that assassinated the monarch, it really did give people a sense that this might kind of be the end times as well. The world was so disrupted, so changed. And a lot of these radical Protestant groups were sort of gathered together into the New Model Army, which was the main fighting force of the Parliament. And it was a very unusual army. It was unlike anything we have today in that it was composed largely of groups of these sort of radical dissenting Protestants, led, then sort of the platoon leaders were preachers. And so it was this collection of very passionate religious and radical religious Protestants that moved around England. And this was all very chaotic, and they actually tried to recruit George Fox as one of the leaders in the New Model Army, which he turned down. He said that there was no need for this outward bearing of arms. And this is often considered sort of one of the first articulations of the peace testimony, the rejection of bearing arms and fighting as a means of resolving our conflicts. Yeah, so more on George Fox. He, I guess, and I resonated with this. His journal is, I would definitely recommend reading his journal to anyone who's interested. He's clearly, as a young age, very pensive and very satisfied with all of the religious teaching that he's hearing and experiencing. He goes to many of these preachers and is just seeking truth, seeking a religious experience that he feels is truly authentic, and is just not finding that anywhere. He's dissatisfied, and honestly, what you guys were talking about, chatter, that was what he was mostly rejecting. He felt like everything were these words, these empty doctrines, these empty arguments about theology that to him just rang false. They rang empty. There was nothing in them that was real. They were just vanity. And this puts him into a bit of a crisis. He really goes through a period where he feels like nothing can speak to his condition. And eventually he has this realization, I think my phrasing might be wrong on this, but there is but one Christ Jesus that can speak to my condition. That the only thing that would truly speak to his life and his spirit was a direct connection to God through Christ, and that was something that he needed to experience inwardly. And that experience was a great sort of breaking open for him. He saw his life. It wasn't entirely it was joyful, but it was also very hard, since he saw his life in its entirety, in its his failings and his sin, but also the possibility of grace and of truth in his life. And after this opening, he goes forth and starts to preach elsewhere. And actually, the early Quakers, we've become much more mild in these later years, but he would disrupt other religious services. And this actually was something Quakers would do fairly often back then. They would go into like big, and I just tried to picture myself running into like a Presbyterian church and starting to yell, just proclaim that this is all falsehood and pretense, and that the sort of the truth is only found through sort of direct experience. And what starts to spread is this sort of practice. What is, and I guess that raises the question though, and this is how does one actually have that sort of experience? What is it that makes that possible? And it requires a sort of worship that they found was different from any of the sort of liturgical practices that were being offered at the time. And so instead they begin to do very much like what we do, and to worship in silence, and to wait upon the Spirit. And then anyone in the meeting, and this was extremely shocking to people in the 1600s, anyone in that room was welcome to speak, including women and children, to offer sermons. And they would offer sermons too. It was, this is another interesting point of difference between us and maybe the early Friends. Our messages tend to be much, much shorter. I think the early Friends would, sometimes have long periods of silence, but someday it would be a full sermon, really, that people would get up, and meetings could last, I think, sometimes an hour, but sometimes 3 hours. They would go, and it spread very, very rapidly, and very, it was a huge movement in England during that period. And it's a little bit hard looking back to really draw clear boundaries necessarily between who were the Quakers and who were these other religious groups that I was talking about. In particular, the Ranters. This became a big problem, distinguishing the Friends from the Ranters. The Ranters were very similar in that they believed in sort of that direct experience, but it led them to believe that the way to sort of true authentic religion is the total rejection of all societal and religious norms. They would practice nudism and just yelling, and just, it was a very sort of exuberant and chaotic kind of religious experience that the Ranters were having. And so often the Quakers would be sort of accused of ranterism, that they would be, they trusted their own inward whims rather than, and this had led them to shed all sort of decency and all respect for anything. Eventually, though, this period of tumult and chaos does sort of come to an end. Charles II is restored to the throne in 1660. Sorry, I should back up just a little bit. It wasn't totally chaotic during the Civil War period, or especially the Commonwealth period, since Cromwell was in control during that time. And so even before the restoration of the monarchy, there was conflict between the Quakers and the sort of more, I guess, similar to what you call sort of Presbyterian groups in Parliament. One of the prominent Quaker leaders, James Naylor, he felt as sort of an act of religious, I honestly am not sure entirely what he was thinking or why he did this, but he rode into Bristol on a donkey on Palm Sunday, and sort of to enact a direct connection, symbolic connection between himself and Christ. And this was seen as greatly blasphemous. He is, it's horribly sort of mutilated and tortured actually by Cromwell and the government for this act of blasphemy. So there's sort of even at that time, the Quakers, there is sort of real conflict and persecution, as well as internal debate. Like, it wasn't accepted that what James Naylor did was, I know Jones Fox did not support that. Yeah, but in general, during that period, they were tolerated. So the Quaker movement was allowed to continue to grow, even if there were these sort of conflicts with other strands of Protestantism. That changes though once the monarchy is restored, at which point there is sort of a period of persecution. Most of the other Protestant groups, the radical Protestant groups, don't make it through this period. The sort of ranters, the diggers, the levelers, the Grindletonians. One reason we don't know these names now is because these religious movements died out. And in part that was because many of them had participated in the New Model Army and were considered an armed threat to the monarchy. They were quite actively persecuted. The Quakers also got into quite a bit of persecution, but they were able to survive in part because of the peace testimony that they declared, and I have the declaration here that was made to, so the declaration from the harmless and innocent people of God called Quakers. This is from 1660 when Charles II is restored. Our principle is, and our practice have always been, to seek peace and ensure it and follow after righteousness and the knowledge of God, seeking the good and welfare and doing that which tends to the peace of all. We know that wars and fighting proceed from the lusts of men, as in scripture, out of which lust the Lord hath redeemed us, and so out of the occasion of war, the occasion of which war and war itself, wherein envious men who are lovers of themselves more than lovers of God lust, kill, and desire to have men's lives and estates, ariseth from the lust. All bloody principles and practices we, as to our own particulars, do utterly deny, with all outward wars and strife and fighting with outward weapons, for any end or any under pretense whatsoever, and this is our testimony to the whole world. So there are sort of, historians have different views of this. The cynical view is that this was an attempt to survive by the Quakers, that they were worried that if they were seen as an armed threat to the monarchy, that they would be very actively put down. But as I was mentioning earlier, George Fox had refused to participate in the New Model Army, and that this sort of tendency towards pacifism and towards peace had been something that predated this peace declaration. In any case, this was sort of one of the first times this was very clearly declared, and the Quakers were identified as peaceful. And it's a little bit while later, then there's this period of persecution, and it's after the Glorious Revolution in 1688, in 1689, when the Act of Toleration is passed, which enables Quaker worship to be practiced freely. I apologize if that introduction was somewhat chaotic to the, I feel like it maybe suits the period though, and that it was itself quite a chaotic and tumultuous period of history. Do people have any questions or additions or things that I feel like I've missed or muddled in this? Great. I guess hopefully that's indicative of some sort of clarity or coherence there. And so one of the things that makes this Quakerism itself so difficult to talk about is from the very beginning, there's this rejection of especially academic theology. George Fox is always railing against the professors, he calls them, which I always find a little bit difficult. My parents are professors, and so but he meant that in, I think, a sort of a very specific way of his time, that they wanted religious life and truth to come from experience, from their lived experience of spirit, and not from an argument based on sort of an interpretation of scripture necessarily, although they were deeply steeped in scripture still. And so they didn't really have systematic theology in a way that was would make it easy to talk about, so if you're a Quaker, you believe the following set of propositions, and then we can argue about the propositions, and if we can decide what's right, what's wrong. That it didn't really work like that. They did eventually try a little bit later in that period. So you have then during the period after the sort of Restoration, there is this sort of attempt to formulate what it is that Quakers believe. The first major attempt is Robert Barclay's Apology, which tries to state what it is that Quakers are doing in silence and why it is that they practice what they practice. I've only read a little bit of it. I don't know if anyone here has read more of it. It is actually, it's quite a difficult read, I feel, just because it's very much in the 17th century style of argumentation, very much sort of early modern form of theological debate, which is, it's difficult to connect to, for myself at least, but does try to sort of lay out why and what it is that we do. And that's, I mean, that's something I appreciate too, although I haven't required it at all, I'm sort of loosely building this course around Rex Ambler's The Quaker Way, a rediscovery, which is, I think, really nice in that it starts off with acknowledging that central tension of writing and thinking and talking about Quakerism, that we don't want to chatter. We don't want to just fill up the room with empty statements and debates, and that's sort of missing the point if we do that. But at the same time, how do we understand ourselves? How do we explain what it is that we're doing to other people? That sort of has been from the beginning, and I think continues to this day, be a bit of a conundrum for Quakers, since so much of the emphasis is on practice and on lived experience. And so I guess just the question is, what is it that that we find in silence? What is it that we're connecting to there? And this was sort of the question too for the early Friends when the style of worship came to first be in practice. What do we experience? How does that affect us? How does that relate to our lives outside of this? And so I guess we'll be taking a break probably in about 10 minutes or so, but just, I'd like, if anyone feels comfortable sharing what it is in silence that they experience. What do they get from the silence, and what is it that they feel? What do they connect to there?
One will experience the natural state.
Sometimes, on some occasions, it's not very often, but there have been some occasions when I feel a connection to the universe.
I really liked in the chapter the way that they described sort of not only getting beyond the chatter, but sort of getting beyond concepts and images and the ego. I found like that really resonated with me.
I don't speak with any understanding of Quaker practice here. Doing it for a day,
Yeah.
so here's what I think the silence means. But I'm very interested in that worship took this form with silence, given that so much of the rest of practice had become completely anarchic, democratic, potentially anarchy, right? And you know, I'm very much interested in our modern day dilemma of just, we have a ton of voices, and you know, I was the one who brought up chatter, right? And like how does this is more of a kind of an active question for me. You know, how does that silence counterbalance some of the tendencies that, like, when I'm quiet in my head, there's a lot of ego that comes out, right? And I'm very much when I look at kind of the history of early Quakers, I mean, there's a lot of kind of infighting, not infighting, that's probably a strong word, but certainly competition among like Naylor and Fox, and what is the structure of silence that allows kind of truth to come out, and egoistic thoughts to be self-censored, or at least examined and investigated. I think there's the magic in that, but I don't know what that is. So
my experience, at least, that's a very fair question. And I wish I had a consistent answer to how to do that, since I don't always, in meeting for worship, get to a place where I can let go of that sort of ego, self-centered little narratives in my head. I often find myself, oh, so what am I going to announce at the end of meeting? Like, did I get enough food for people to eat between the time? Like, just even little very mundane concerns. Or I certainly, as Rex Ambler says, things concerned with my status and how other people perceive me. Very much constantly. Sadly, I feel probably on everyone's mind. That's just, I feel like how people are. How to get past that, what the structure of silence is. There's something about being with other people, I think, that helps me do that. And that's one reason why I value Quaker meeting, as opposed to just being quiet for a while on my own. I should probably try to do more of that, honestly. But having other people there, for one thing, it actually does impose some sort of conformity on me, just in that, like, I have these people around me, so I do need to sit here. And then more importantly than that, though, it's the sense that we're doing this together, that we're trying to be open to something that we can't name and that we can't control or be own, or sort of put into a box of our own making. Sometimes, not always, I do feel that, and I feel that openness. And sometimes that experience is fleeting, but it's still, for me, worth coming back to try to find. Other people have experiences and that they'd like to share.
A sense of oneness, or kind of unity, or that I'm glad, James, that you mentioned being with other people, because it's utterly kind of personal and interior, but it's shared. And I don't, as you said, it's kind of hard to describe, a little bit beyond words, but the fact that we're all doing it together, even on Zoom, has an effect, which is, I don't know, amplifying or something. I like in the chapter, the first chapter of the Quaker Way book, the emphasis on the word experiment, and the idea that, when Quakerism arose, there's a lot of interest in, what people can learn for themselves, about themselves, by themselves, without necessarily deferring to some authoritarian figure. And so the idea that that this is available to any one of us, is just, it's just an important aspect of it, to me, and also helps deal with this kind of tension that I have personally with tendency in religion to proselytize, to try and convince people that this belief will lead to this, potential spiritual outcome. um, or that we need to increase our ranks through proselytizing, and instead Quakerism says, well, give it some thought. See for yourself, and that is empowering in a way that is just very encouraging.
Does the book give any indication that the meditation in Quakerism is different than the meditation in Buddhism or other Eastern religions? Because meditation is one of the backbones of many Eastern religions, particularly on the Indian subcontinent. So there have been many studies that have shown that when you meditate with a group of people, the brain waves or your brain activity is increased when you meditate with other people than if you meditate by yourself. So I'm curious to know whether, when Quakerism's been around for a couple, 2-3 years, 1600s, 300-400 years. So is there a difference? Should there be a difference? Is it all the same? Can anyone help me with that? Can anyone even hear me? I don't even know if people can hear me.
We can.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Having done both, I have experienced that kind of connection to the universe, doing both in a group. I don't know that I can't say whether or not it's the same, but I have experienced that kind of collective unity and transformation doing both meditation, Buddhist meditation in a group and in friends meeting. I'm not going to say it's the same, but I have had that very similar experience.
I was going to add, first off, I'm sorry I was a little late. I was delivering grandchildren back to their parents after being here all night. So, and we did have to stop by Round Rock Donuts to give them a try on the way home. But yeah, I mean, so much, everything kind of resonates. For me, I think the original query was, kind of what do you experience in the silence, and I think I've heard several times what I was going to say, and that's that I'm never quite sure what it's going to feel like. It may feel like several different ways, and I don't really try to make it feel one way or another. I mean, there's some days that I feel that very sense of being connected, and and like several have said, James said, and Jim said too, that sense of community stronger for me when it's all together at the meeting house, but also present when we're together on Zoom. It amplifies or it brings about whatever feeling I'm going to have in that silence that day. It brings it about much more quickly, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that answers anything. The times that I do feel very connected, there's certainly a warmth and a relaxation, but yet a sense of, it's also a sense of alertness there. There's relaxation, that there's not tension, but there's alertness, and certainly a sense of warmth that I'll feel in that particular time when I'm connected. But sometimes I'm squirming in my seat too. So.
That's a great question, and I guess I don't have quite enough experience with other meditative traditions to really speak about them. one thing I feel might be different is there is a deep sense in Quakerism that you're waiting on the Spirit, and it's not something that with great technique you can necessarily control, or I guess I may be, please forgive me if I am misrepresenting any other tradition, that that's just that sort of openness and waiting for something that's kind of other than what you have. That's so often, and this makes, I think, one of the difficulties of Quakerism is there isn't a lot of explicit instruction in terms of how to do this, which makes it hard to know if you're doing it right or if you are actually being in the silence. And there, you will find some people who've written and trying to help people open themselves in this way, in the silence. But ultimately, it's sort of a bit of a surrender and an opening. And I feel like that's when I find that I feel like I've maybe gotten to that place, that's where I feel like the sort of greater realizations or maybe vocal ministry might come is in those moments.
And with that, with the sort of idea of waiting, I think that's been the subtle difference for me, just between other sorts of, whether it's like centering prayer or meditation, something about adopting a listening stance just seems to make me feel more receptive versus when I try to focus on my breath or focus on a mantra or an image. There's just something about waiting and listening that's a little bit more passively receptive. And so it's always felt a little bit different for me in some sort of subtle way.
I see that we've been talking. I don't want to cut the discussion short, but we talked for about an hour now. I was just wondering, we maybe take a short break. People need to use the restroom or anything, come back, maybe 5 minutes or so. So a little after like 2:12 or so. Great. All right. Break.
Should be encouraged.
Chip, you should unmute yourself so we can hear. That's so nice. Is that what is
That's my mandolin. That was actually a piece by Turlough O'Carolan, who is often called the composer of Ireland. He was actually from about George Fox's time, maybe a little bit later than that. He was a blind musician who rode horseback or muleback around Ireland and found sponsors. He would stay in their houses and he would write songs about their daughters and stuff. So anyway, thank you. And you got to be careful to ask somebody who's a musician to play music. So glad you enjoyed it.
what was the piece called?
It's called Shebeg Shemor, which translated from old Celtic was it means big hill, little hill, and it was about there actually were words to it that were put not by Turlough O'Carolan but later. It was about a two elf groups that went into battle at two hills, Big Hill and Little Hill. So I've never learned the words, but called Shebeg Shemor, Big Hill, Little Hill.
Great. So I guess we starting back up in maybe just another minute or so. People have maybe we'll wait another minute. I think Mitch might be coming back here in a second. Great. Great. All right. Gosh, yeah. So I guess before I launch on to other questions and topics, are there other questions or things people want to share about what we've talked about so far?
I really appreciated Prakash's question about whether there's a difference between the experience and different faith traditions of meditation. And Heath, I appreciated your suggestion that listening is maybe what makes the difference. And that stance that we have of being open to each other, being open to messages that we'll hear not just from within us, but from others around us, I think really does have something to do with it. In Zen Buddhist meditation, there's advice to like let thoughts come and go and not focus on any one thing. Maybe start over with breath counting if you're finding yourself getting easily distracted. But the lack of explicit instructions around meditation techniques in Quakerism leads to I think probably a more diverse types of experience any one person might have, or that any of us are having. I mean, we're all completely different people. Anyway, I'll stop there, but I really appreciate that, James, that you're asking for questions and that other people are asking questions, because I feel like I'm learning from these questions as well.
No, the next question I was going to ask, and the sort of chapter we're structuring it around, is about truth. And I guess we're listening. And out of that listening and out of that openness, the early friends, and I think friends today experience that we find truth in that, that we can find truths about ourselves and about our relationship to the world and to each other. And I just was hoping we could spend a little bit of time talking about what do those truths look like? What is a truth like that? Since one sort of version of revelation and truth would be that you maybe like kind of, like the 10 Commandments or something, that you've come to this truth and it has been handed to you and this is the law and you have been given a revelation and you should share it forth because that is the word of God that has come to you. And for the most part, my sense is we are doing something different from that, not quite that sort of, how to speak with sort of a prophetic voice with listening to spirit. But if someone in meeting for worship rose up and offered that they had experienced a new commandment of some sort, I'm not sure we would accept that, or that would, I'm not sure what we would do with that, honestly. It's a bit of a conundrum. And there are branches of the Quaker movement that sort of split off and would do that. I think the Shakers, who they practiced all universal abstinence. They made beautiful furniture and lived in these communities that were structured by all these rules that they felt that they had received. And then they would share as this is the commandment of this new period that we must all follow. We don't do that. And so understanding, and my question to you, and this is honestly a very authentic question, and I'm not sure I have the right answer to this, but what is the sort of truth that comes to us in meeting for worship and in vocal ministry? What is it that we're finding there? Yeah.
I find the truth in my body. It's not a verbal truth. It's a feeling in my body. It's almost like at times, like I say, a connection to the universe. It's like a connection with the universe and with nature. And like everything else just melts away. And then at those moments, I feel like that's when ego melts away. And then I think I'm probably a lot more receptive to others' messages. The message to myself is I achieve a clarity with myself, but I think I'm much more open to others' messages. But it's a body, it's a sensation in my body. I don't know how else to describe it.
Thing I notice about the sort of messages that come to me and to other people as well. I feel like they're grounded in something really deep and universal and broadly true, but that they almost always seem to be grounded in a very immediate experience of that person or of our community or of our country, that this is they're truths that reveal what is in our lives. And that so that it would feel, yeah, just wrong or inconsequential to say like just some random new law that I've come up or that I feel like I've received that would just feel very out of place somehow. It wouldn't feel like it was grounded in that real experience of my life and of the life of this community and world.
At at uh, at meeting for worship some weeks back, we had someone speak on this topic about whether we're each uh, experiencing the same truth or experiencing our own truths. Um, and the ministry that was being given was that we're all experiencing the same truth, and that in fact is what grounds us. Um, I I have to confess I'm a little skeptical about that, but I think maybe it's a distinction without a difference. Um, I'm not sure it matters the ultimate nature of the truth that we are each getting in touch with, and maybe it has to do with uh, the what we've already heard today, which is, it's embodied and it's grounded, um, and and so if if we're if I mean, I might sound like a ranter, I guess, right? That if you believe it to be true, it is, or if you feel it to be true, it is. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. Um, but there's something about the silence and the shared silence that makes it seem like we're sharing a truth. And it's a truth that can't necessarily be articulated or put into words, or defined. Um, uh, but yeah, I like that idea that it is embodied and that each of us, um, yeah, it's embodied and it's grounded. And I don't know whether it is uh, transcendent and something that we're each getting in touch with. There's this metaphor in Buddhism, Indra's net, where each knot in the net has a jewel, and each jewel reflects all the other jewels, the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. Um, that's a beautiful image. Maybe it's something like that. Um, but even if it's just each of us with our own internal truth, that without an external standard against which they can be compared or judged, uh, it's okay. I'm not sure I can articulate why it's okay, but I think it's okay.
I also just want to say I'm a little bit conflicted about it because I've known Buddhists, and I myself tend to get a little wrapped up in the feeling I get, in that transformative feeling, because it's almost like a high. And I can be a little selfish about it. Like I want to keep that feeling, that switch that goes off in my brain. So I have to also watch that and try to remember, or try to somehow not make it about getting that great feeling, but make it about my inner voice and connecting with the universe, and not just getting this great, brain transformation. And that used to happen to me with Buddhism too. And I've also heard other Buddhists talk about that, like almost brag about it. So it's something I have to be really careful about with myself.
I don't see a contradiction between what was just said and the meditation that's encouraged through Quakerism. What I mean by that is, if the Buddhist meditation does improve your blood flow to your brain and gives you that high, that could actually make your other spiritual journey during meditation better. Am I wrong? Is there a contradiction? I don't see one.
I think I'm perceiving that in myself there might be some ego involved a little bit.
Another thing that was important to our early friends was the idea that if you receive vocal ministry or some truth was uncovered in meeting for worship, that it's not entirely contained within that just that experience. It's something that you then take out of meeting and act on in the world. That it's you've realized they often have some sort of truths about yourself, sort of morally, in terms of what sort of person you are. Usually, it's I realize I'm not doing so well on something, or just have been sort of my judgment or my thoughts have been clouded in some way, and that I hope that that's something that I can bring from worship into actual just lived daily life, and that that's a really important connection. That otherwise, it's not, if it's a truth that only just exists in its one moment by itself, that I don't know that that's quite right. It has to be something that spreads out and comes into your life fully. To share though, Jim, sometimes that sort of more, I also, as like a philosophy major as an undergrad, that sort of more skeptical position too, that there is some sort of, that there is that truth that we're getting to. I guess, Hannah, you brought up Nietzsche, like whether this is just a series of masks and we're just pulling one mask off to find another one, in terms of these truths of ourselves. That's the very kind of despairing view of what's happening. Yeah, I guess, I don't know, can we ever know that we are actually finding some truth about ourselves as opposed to a deeper layer of self-deception or there something about the experience that lets us know that it is real?
I think for me, like both leadings, vocal ministry, I mean, they may come a little bit differently, but some of the commonality is that internally for me, I have to ask myself, is this coming from that source of love within me, from that source of light, from spirit within me, in a loving manner? That's kind of the first criteria. You know, is this a truth or is it not a truth? If it's coming from a place that I'm self-aware enough to realize that I'm maybe really feeling still a little miffed about something that happened yesterday. And if I recognize that, then certainly I can tell myself, no, this is not from spirit. This is my ego speaking loud and clear. So I mean that's part of it. There's a lot of good discussion too about the sense of community. I mean, to me, one of the main attractions of Quakerism has been that it is an individual experience, that I am capable of having that individual experience, but yet I can have that individual experience within a community of people doing the same thing that most every time makes it much more powerful for me, and so that's kind of the beauty and of that, and I think that was all I wanted to say.
This is probably a topic that will come up again in Quakerism 101. It's, I think, a question we're always asking ourselves as well. Some people have mentioned vocal ministry, which people do offer from time to time, when I guess one of these truths rises from the level of something just for me that I need to enact in my life, or that I need to experience and know, to something I do need to speak and to share with this community. I would just like to hear if anyone has offered vocal ministry during meeting for worship, what that was like, what led you to share vocal ministry, and also, I mean, or if you haven't shared vocal ministry, if you have any questions about it, or what it is that, yeah, what have you felt like you maybe wanted to share something, whether it was appropriate? I thought it was interesting, the message today, for those in meeting for worship, she asked, would it be appropriate for me to say this at the beginning? Which I think it definitely was, but I feel like it's something we don't always communicate very well. What is acceptable? What is when one should offer vocal ministry? So yeah, when have you guys offered vocal ministry, and what has that been like?
Well, I guess I'll just return to the point about things being embodied, and for myself, it's usually, yeah, more often than not, I'm trying to like not share vocal ministry, and it's when I can't not, that and so the maybe this gets back also to your question, James, about how do we know that what we're experiencing is true, or is something that carries spiritual meaning and value. And part of it, I think, for me, is relates to healing, and reduction of, not well, yeah, I mean, you could say pain reduction, but also I've always been drawn to this concept in Judaism called tikkun olam, which means repair of the world. The idea being that the world is constantly in creation, being co-created by God and humans, and that it's the world's always a little bit broken, and is in need of repair. And so this is at least in Reform Judaism a large source of social justice activism, and some of that I think relates to a vocal ministry as well, and that and also to my own willingness to receive vocal ministry from others. It's like I'm gonna look for the healing in the message that I'm hearing.
I guess it's been a little while since I've shared vocal ministry during meeting for worship. When I have, I guess people, it's interesting talking about bodily experience. I usually feel like something sort of very deep inside of me that's maybe even before conscious knows I'm going to share vocal ministry before I even get up and do it. I feel my heart. I know the message is there, and I feel my heart start racing a little bit. And I know that this is something that needs to be said. Something that just has that sort of resonance and force to it. It is tricky though, since of course a lot of things can cause my heart to start racing. Some of them, like just if I'm angry or something bad, that would definitely not be something I'd want to share. As well, maybe I don't know. As righteous anger can be, right? I guess, but that it is connected to love and to not just me trying to defend myself for my ego or my reputation or to sound good in meeting. Those are usually what I try to test it. And then that with that sort of inward sense that this is something that I need to say that's going to come out. That's what that experience has been like. And yeah, I don't know why it hasn't come to me for a while now. I sort of want it to, but I know it's not something I can force or I should try to force. Gosh, just those were all the questions that I honestly had for today for all of you. Does anybody else have any questions that they want to ask today?
So James, I want to make sure I understand. During the Friends meditation, there's no prescription or requirement or anywhere in the Friends history or techniques that say you have to meditate on the scripture. There's nothing that says that, correct?
As far as I know, there isn't, no.
None of the canonical texts say that, as far as I know. For Quakerism, but I'm not by any means an expert in any of this. So that's kind of what I wanted to know. And what would be the reaction of the Friends if people meditated on the floor? What, on the ground with a cushion? Why are there pews? I know that there are pews for people who want to use them, that's fine. But what if somebody meditated on the ground? How would that be viewed or seen? Like when I say ground, I mean like on the carpet, on the floor. I always wondered about that too. Again, if these are insane questions, you don't have to answer them. But I was.
Those are good questions. I think first off, I think that there really isn't any canon requirement within Quakerism, at least in the Friends General Council unprogrammed meetings such as Friends Meeting of Austin. At least that's how I view it. And the closest I guess we come perhaps is our faith and practices, which are online, and there's certainly, I think, in fact, I have been since the pandemic. There have been people sitting on the floor during worship because it's more comfortable. There would be, I think, no concern from anyone whatsoever if someone was sitting on the floor and that was how they were comfortable worshiping. There's and as far as scripture, whether it's the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, or other spiritual writings, for me personally, I do keep a Bible. Ooh, where is it? Right there. I'm sorry, it's right over here to my right. I do have one there, and I have other spiritual books here too. And I think you probably find among a lot of the friends meeting, I think you probably would find a number of Bibles, but you probably find a number of other spiritual books as well. So I think maybe back to kind of the original discussion too on, because I don't give vocal ministry a whole lot, but I do, and usually it's when there's already been some vocal ministry that has already resonated with me in some manner. That's typically for me how it ends up working. Somebody has given vocal ministry that spoke to me in a manner that may or may not have been exactly what they were meaning, but it did speak to me. And sometimes sometimes even when it's not what was necessarily intended, sometimes is the most powerful vocal ministry when it resonates.
Okay, and by vocal ministry, we're talking about when people get up during the friends meeting, during the meditation, and something moves them to speak. That's what we're talking. As opposed to someone coming to your house and kind of giving you counseling. That's not vocal ministry, right?
That's what I would describe. Yes, I would describe vocal ministry being during worship, when we're gathered together in worship. Somebody feels a leading to deliver a message.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. For what it's worth, I can tell you that in the few instances I've been at the Austin Friends meeting, it's half or less than what I experienced as a kid at the Bucks County, Philadelphia meeting. They were talking all the time. Maybe that's a different generation. I don't know. But they would talk about their experiences, in the prison, when they visited prisoners, things of that nature. So personally, as someone new, if I think we should have, it would help people like me anyway, if more people stood up and said whatever moved them. Because it helps me personally, And I know that's a selfish reason, but helps me in the sense that someone earlier, I think it was Jim or somebody said, with the healing, knowing that, we're not alone, that we all have similar trials and tribulations. And we kind of know that intuitively, but to hear it, I don't know. Yeah, anyway, I'll stop now.
Gosh, well, thank you. Yeah, I honestly, I often feel the same way too about that, Prakash. And I think that, and I encourage everyone here today, even if you're relatively new to Quaker meeting, know that you can and you're welcome to offer vocal ministry. if you feel led. That is totally a good and acceptable thing. And I feel like this is a very just human tendency. If no one talks for a while, then it becomes harder and harder to talk. We get just sort of accustomed to that. It feels like it raises the bar. I haven't attended many other Quaker meetings, but the one other one I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And that was very much like what you were describing, Prakash. It was every 5 minutes or so, we had someone share a ministry. That was just a different Quaker culture there. So I'm not sure how we've become so silent. I hope it's not that Spirit has just stopped talking to us here in Austin, but I hope, yeah, I think it's partially on me too. I need to know. Today, I even was like, oh, is this a message? I had that question for myself, and I chose to I didn't think it was, but maybe I was wrong about that. That was something I should have shared. It is hard to discern.
Wait, didn't think it was what?
It just I didn't know that it was true, or that it was. I felt it deeply, but it just, I felt like I still had too many questions and too many doubts about it to
Well,
share
but I
that.
mean, but if you feel that it's true, I mean, say it. I mean, it's probably true. I mean, your gut reaction's usually, the first reaction's usually the most truthful, right? So,
Yeah.
I, for one, am someone who loves silence, and it's because there's so much noise everywhere. I just love the silence. So I understand other people have other things they like, but I just think the silence is golden. And I love when people share too. And I love, love, love that in Quaker worship, we listen when somebody shares. I find that so unique and special. So.
And we let it settle too. If I can just add, we let it settle between. That's so important. And if I can just say, I just put in the chat, and the reason I put it in there was 2 opportunities to worship with other friends around the world in prayer for Ukraine. There's one, the Friends of Ukraine is in the chat, along with some Zoom links, as well as the Friends House of Moscow. And the reason I put those in there, and it came up just now, that in a couple of those, there's 300 or 400 people online for an hour's worth of worship, and because of that, even though it's an unprogrammed worship, they do have to say, we're going to maintain silence for the first 10 minutes and for the last 10 minutes, so that so that there is a period of silence in front and back. But like was just said, it gets, I like to have some time to let things settle and grow in my spirit after I've heard them, and it does get a little bit hard. So yes, use your vocal ministry, absolutely, but also, respect the silence that comes before and after. That's really the point.
yeah, maybe there's a balance between the two.
I'm thinking of a poem by Whittier. He describes, I can't remember the title of it, I think it was Sunday Morning Worship, but he describes meeting for worship, a Quaker meeting for worship, and he talks about how it may be that nobody will offer vocal ministry at all. So it seems to me it must not have been that unusual back in the 19th century for a meeting to go on without any vocal ministry being spoken.
When you first asked about people sitting on the floor, I thought of I think it was the first time I came to the Friends meeting of Austin, and there was a man in the corner in the recliner, kind of like in the middle in the corner, but I think he was injured. He was like in a puffy jacket and pretty stiff, but like almost fully reclined back. And I had forgotten that really stood out to me at the time, that like I liked that he came and that he felt it was still a place for him. in the condition he was in. Not in a, very much not in a pew.
Prakash, when I grew up in a Pittsburgh Friends meeting, it was lots of chatter, lots of people sharing political messages and sometimes ranting about the government. I mean, it got a little tiring, and so I also appreciate the silence, and that's probably why I was so surprised at my own reaction at Friends Meeting of Austin, of just being so open to what other people had to say, and feeling like a real benefit from it. As you're saying, it's like I agree. I kind of wish people would speak up more often, because it's like sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, I did not know I needed to hear that, but it's sort of surprising, and in a gentle and loving kind of way. It's like the older I get, the less I know, and the more I need to hear from other people.
Oh yeah, I was also gonna say, over the summer I was going to a Friends meeting in Evanston, Illinois, and that was the only other Friends meeting I've been to apart from Friends meeting Boston, and I noticed how much more people were speaking. It was a lot more than, yeah. That's all.
Well, thank you. Thank you. No, I just said thanks.
Yeah, gosh. So I guess if there are any further questions, just some sort of little wrapping up things. Our next session will be in 2 weeks' time. So we'll be doing this on the second and fourth Sundays of the month. And so the next chapter will be themed around looking for God. So really, I feel like this is one of the deepest and most difficult questions in Quakerism, is how we talk or think about God and the divine spirit. And they're sort of non-theist friends, so we'll be having all sorts of questions there. If I could also get, I know I have a few of your emails, and I'm sending you guys just little reminders and questions and stuff. But if I haven't emailed you yet about this, if you wouldn't mind just quickly throwing your email into the chat, so I can make sure to include you on any future correspondence about Quakerism 101. That'd be great. Awesome, thank you. And yeah, does anybody other questions about Quaker, or like just logistical questions about the next few sessions of this?
Do you have any idea where we can find the book?
Yeah, so I got so this is the book we're reading again. I'll show you. Quick Way, Rex Ambler. It's quite good. Unfortunately, when I decided to do this, I love it, but it is out of print. There are copies around, so I just got 6 copies. They're not here yet. I'm pointing to the table, but they will be coming, I think, this week, hopefully. So I'll have them here. So if you want to borrow, or they'll also be available if you want to buy them here. They're available online. And if you do ebooks, there's definitely available in sort of ebook electronic form. I know Hannah, I don't know if you have the only copy, but I think they're also like through the public library. You can rent them as an ebook. I think that's another possibility. So there are a few different ways that it is available. But Barnes & Noble, yeah, a lot of.
I ordered one from Alibris.
Oh, great. Okay.
Not sure if I pronounced that right. Alibris. It's it's an online website that just, if there's a book that you can't find anywhere else, you'll probably find it there.
Excellent. And yeah, so the readings, of course, sorry, but they, so it's not required, and of course, I hope that these discussions will still be something you can participate fully, even if you don't have access to the book. And if you have to miss any of the sessions, of course, love if everyone can to all of them, but they do pretty much intended to sort of stand alone, so that they can come to whatever you can make it to. Anyway, thank you guys. Oh, and you were going to say the name of the poet that you referred to earlier?
Oh, yeah, John Greenleaf Whittier.
Whittier.
And I'm sorry, I wish I could remember the exact words that he spoke, because the lines are very reassuring. You know, it just this is.
He's a Quaker.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thanks. I found it and I dropped the link into the chat. So thanks for mentioning that. I totally forgot about that poem, and I'm gonna read it again.
I wanted to ask, I didn't even realize we were in person again. Is there any process? Can we just show up?
Yeah, I guess as long as you, I guess, are vaccinated, you're totally welcome to come to, in-person worship. And I think we'll also, assuming things stay pretty good, we'll keep going in this sort of hybrid format. So you're welcome to either come and join Quakerism 101 here. I brought some snacks along so that we could, those who are here could not be too hungry. So that was, yes, we'll keep doing that. So we'll keep having, and it will still be available via Zoom for people who want to do it that way.
It's so exciting.
Anyway, yeah, so very excited. Thank you all so much for being here. I really have loved hearing from all of you. It's
great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Great.
I'm really glad I came.
Yeah, I'm really glad you came too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.